Citizen watch assigned the PCAT an MSRP of $650, but they're selling it for $520 on their product page now. I bought the PCAT for $374 before tax on sale at Kohl's. I knew that the name PCAT had to be an abbreviation. Neither the Citizen product page nor the manual explains what PCAT stands for. A similar model PCAT describes the first two letters of the abbreviation PC as standing for Perpetual Chrono. I'm going to guess that the AT stands for either atomic time or atomic time keeping. The PCAT comes in lightweight packaging in a small watch box with a heavy cardboard box watch container. It also comes with an information pamphlet that has information about their app, which I didn't install, instructions, and their very generous 5-year warranty. I chose the PCAT to review over other Citizen Chronos because the PCAT has a sapphire crystal. The sapphire crystal is flat and raised over the fixed bezel. The crystal has anti-reflective coating. I don't detect any tint to the anti-reflective coating, which is my preference. The PCAT is very readable in both bright light and low light. A lot of this, I think, has to do with the nice reflectivity of both the hands and the indexes. When I first took the PCAT out of the box and looked at the bracelet links, I said to myself, really? From Citizen's stock photo of the PCAT, it looked like it had independently articulating mid-links. Citizen had tricked me. It actually had fake independently articulating mid-links. It doesn't bother me that a watch in this price range lacks independently articulating mid-links. I don't expect this. What bothers me is that the watch is really going out of its way to pretend it has real mid-links. This looks very phony to me. I don't like the recessed, polished track running along the center of the mid-links either. It looks jarring and tacky. The sides of the links are too rough as well because Citizen didn't smooth them properly. This isn't some independent Chinese watch brand that has to source its bracelets. This is Citizen Watch. This is the major leagues. Citizen has to smooth the sides of their bracelets properly at the $400 price level, and even at the $100 price level. On the left is the $100 Casio Edifice with a sapphire crystal that I reviewed. On the right is the PCAT. As you can see, both clasps have thin metal scissors. At $400, I think Citizen could have used a thick metal scissor, but that's not what really bothers me. What really bothers me is that Citizen didn't bother to smooth the edges of its clasp, while Casio, on the other hand, cared enough about its customers to make its clasp super smooth. You could make love to a woman for hours with the $100 Casio Edifice and never have to worry about scratching her. You have to take the $400 Citizen PCAT off before you make love if you're any kind of gentleman, as the edges of the clasp, while not sharp, are abrasive. Even in the stock photo of the PCAT, you can see that there's a tiny gap between the end link and the lugs. This isn't a big deal to me. The end links aren't loose. The brushing and color of the end links and the lugs match pretty well. I think the end links look a little jarring to me because their edges come way short of meeting the edges of the lugs. The finish of the side of the case, I think, belies the capricious nature of those in charge of production at Citizen. You'll notice that the side of the case is entirely polished. If you don't give this much thought, it would look like just another watch case which is cheesily polished on its side to pretend that it's classy. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that this polishing wasn't the original intent of the design team. Here we have a chamfered lug edge leading into a very large polished area, which aesthetically makes no sense to me. The fixed bezel is clearly delineated and well-rounded. I know why the designers did this. They wanted to do a layered finish. They wanted that polished fixed bezel to really pop and stand out against the area beneath it, which they intended to brush. The chamfer only makes sense to me here against the brushed area as well. The PCAT was originally intended to look much more like the Cherry Blossom Edifice that I reviewed, which had a very rich layering of brushed and polished areas. The PCAT would have looked vastly better had the sides been brushed. To me, it's clear that Citizen is subverting its own design team, and I'm going to speculate that it's to cut costs. The lugs are missing drilled lug holes. After paying $400 for a watch, I feel I deserve drilled lug holes. I was put off that Citizen didn't sign the crown. It added to the growing sense that I was feeling that Citizen was trying to nickel and dime me in any way that they could. The very best feature of the PCAT is its case design, which I am going to call from this point forward a superfitter case design. Two things stand out for me about the superfitter case design: a flat case back and very steep angled lugs. The Citizen GMT dive watch that I reviewed also used a superfitter case design. The superfitter, in my experience, is one of the best case designs, as it really saddles the watch to your wrist. The superfitter allows for much larger watches to be worn comfortably. The PCAT's diameter is 43.5 millimeters, which puts it in the range of a mid-sized watch. The measured lug-to-lug of 49 millimeters, which exceeds the traditional de facto maximum lug width limit of 48 millimeters, doesn't do a proper job of measuring the actual length of the watch while on your wrist, as the end links flare out so much. The real length of the watch is 52 millimeters. Because of its large length, I'd say the PCAT is a large-leaning, mid-sized watch. The PCAT's case thickness of 13 millimeters is ridiculously thick for a solar quartz watch. I've reviewed watches with thick mechanical movements that had thinner cases than the PCAT. The PCAT's case thickness should not have exceeded 12 millimeters. To give you some perspective, I'm comparing the PCAT in the right column to the 43 millimeter in diameter, 13.5 millimeter thick Seiko 5 Sports in the left column. I'm modeling both watches. My wrist is about 7 inches. The PCAT, which is only a half millimeter wider, is considerably bigger than the Seiko 5 Sports because it's so much longer. The PCAT wears absolutely great. After observing the PCAT's stiff bracelet links that have a limited range of articulation, I never would have imagined how well the PCAT actually wears. The PCAT has a 22 millimeter bracelet width that wears more like a 20 millimeter. It reaches maximum taper by its third link at 20 millimeters. It's 21 millimeters wide at the clasp. The bracelet uses push pins. I had no issues sizing the bracelet. While Citizen has done a stellar job at making the PCAT comfortable to wear, there's a caveat, which is that it's probably not going to fit you right. The PCAT's bracelet doesn't have micro adjusts. It uses a half link, which is about 5 millimeters. This is the half link. The half link gives you a sizing granularity of 5 millimeters as compared to your standard bracelet with micro adjusts, which gives you about 2 millimeters of sizing granularity. It was a miracle that I happened to pull out 2 links from the bracelet and have the PCAT fit me perfectly. The PCAT's caseback, typical of Citizen, is unspectacular. What is surprising about the caseback is that it has 20 bar inscribed on it, which is the same as Citizen specs on its website, that I thought might have been an error. 20 bar is a lot of water resistance, as much as a dive watch, yet the PCAT doesn't have a screw-down crown, which is what I would expect of a watch that has this level of water resistance. I'm not going to second-guess Citizen on this. If Citizen says the PCAT can survive an awesome amount of water pressure, I believe them. You can swim and skin dive with the PCAT. However, the manual warns against scuba and saturation diving with the PCAT. The PCAT uses the E660 Eco Drive movement. This is a solar quartz movement. On a full charge, the PCAT can go up to 10 months without light. The movement has a low power warning and a power level indicator. You can access the power level indicator by pressing the bottom pusher. The power level is indicated by the power level gauge in the top right subdial. This subdial lacks a border. The arrow of my power level indicator is pointing to the top of the gauge, indicating that my PCAT is at full power. The PCAT attempts to synchronize its time with your local atomic clock every night. In the United States, this clock is located in Colorado. Pressing the bottom pusher also tells you whether or not your PCAT was able to successfully synchronize with your local atomic clock. The second hand will point to the red OK at the top of the dial if the synchronization was successful, and the red No at the top of the dial if the synchronization was unsuccessful. Citizen says in their product page that the PCAT has dual time zones. To me, a dual time zone means that you can see the time in two separate time zones at once on your watch. I've looked through the entire 84-page PCAT manual looking for this feature and was unable to find it. Citizen should have said that the PCAT has the ability to be set to any time zone, or what I would describe as having a time zone quick set feature. My PCAT is currently set to Los Angeles time, which is 3 hours behind me in Vermont. To set the time zone to my current time zone, which is the same as New York, I would first need to find out what number my time zone is. To do this, I look at the chart in the manual, starting on page 26. I can see from the chart that my time zone is represented by the number -5. I use the time zone quick set feature to change the time zone by pulling the crown out to the second position. Notice how when I do this, the second hand points to the current time zone, indicated as -8. I change the time zone to -5 by turning the crown clockwise 3 times. Notice how the second hand now points to -5. You can find out your current time zone when the crown is fully pushed in by pressing the top pusher. Pressing the top pusher will also tell you whether automatic daylight savings time switching is activated. This is indicated by the arrow of the top right subdial pointing to either on or off. When automatic daylight savings time is switched on, the PCAT should automatically change to and from daylight savings time automatically. But this will only happen if the PCAT is successful at making a connection with the atomic clock. The nightmarish aspect of atomically synchronized clocks for me has always been the switching to and from daylight savings time, as atomic clock reception in New England is so marginal. The PCAT has surprisingly performed flawlessly when synchronizing with the atomic clock and has not failed to synchronize in the week that I've had it. The PCAT has an alarm clock, which I'm not going to show you how to use, as I think the vast majority of people are going to use their phone to set alarms instead. The PCAT's main feature, its 60-minute chronograph, is a deal breaker for me. To access the Chrono, you have to change the mode from time mode to chrono mode. You do this by pulling the crown out 1 notch. The second hand will point south. Now you have to turn the crown clockwise until the arrow in the bottom subdial points to CHR. Once it points to CHR, you're not yet in chrono mode. You have to remember to push the crown back in. Once you've done this, the top right subdial indicates elapsed minutes. You can start and stop the stopwatch by pressing the top pusher. The bottom pusher resets the stopwatch. And when you're finished using the stopwatch, you have to go through all that nonsense again of pulling out the crown to set the PCAT back to normal time mode. And that's if you remember to do all this. And God forbid you don't remember to do all this, as it sets up the nightmare scenario of your mistaking elapsed minutes of the stopwatch for the day of the week, as this subdial has this duplicate function depending on whether you're in normal time mode or chrono mode. The PCAT isn't dummy-proof. You don't have to have a PhD in engineering to see this. Going to and from the Chrono is in itself an immense pain in the ass. Also, I don't like pulling out the crown of a watch unless I'm setting the time or date, as you potentially introduce dirt and dust that could, over time, damage the watch. I lost a lot of respect for Citizen when I saw how horribly they implemented the Chrono feature. Another major feature of the PCAT that Citizen utterly botched is the date. The black date wheel looks hideous against a navy blue dial background, but a far bigger issue is that the date is way too recessed in the dial, has poor contrast, and is crammed into the date window. I don't have great eyesight. I find the date to be fairly unreadable. I like dates and watches. I rely on dates and watches to tell me the date. Watches with unreadable dates bother me, but when Citizen puts an unreadable date into a watch that features a perpetual calendar, this is too egregious an insult to the consumer for me to simply be bothered by it. I am made to go ballistic when I see something like this. One of the greatest features you can put into an analog watch is a perpetual calendar. A perpetual calendar makes life so much easier, and I love perpetual calendars that you can actually read. What is the point of calling a watch a PCAT, the first two letters of which indicate that it's a perpetual calendar, when you can't even read the date? If I hadn't already failed the PCAT for its poor Chrono implementation, I would have failed the PCAT for its terrible perpetual date implementation. I expect hack watchmaking like this from Chinese knockoff brands, not from one of the largest and most technologically innovative watchmakers in the world. The top left subdial is a 24-hour clock. I thought that maybe the 24-hour clock doubled as a secondary time zone clock, but I couldn't find anything in the manual to indicate this. With exception to the sword-handled second hand, which is kind of cool, there's nothing exceptional about the handset or the indexes. They are, however, very readable, especially in low light, due to their high degree of reflectivity, and they are able to be reflective without being blingy. I find the watch face to be uncluttered and easy to read. The second hand of the PCAT is hitting the marks poorly. I find this to be completely unacceptable in a $400 watch. I'm comparing the PCAT's lume to the Seiko 5 Sports on the left. The PCAT's lume is superb and will last you all night. It's very impressive how Citizen was able to apply such a strong application of lume to such thin lume markers on the indexes. The PCAT weighs 166 grams, sized for my wrist, and 176 grams unsized. This is on the light side for a watch of the PCAT's size. I can't recommend the PCAT. I think the watch is not very well thought out and is a pure exercise in exploitation from Citizen Watch. I saw a lot of corners being cut with the Citizen GMT diver that I reviewed a few months ago, but at least this watch was giving you some real value for the money. You're not getting anything special for $400 with the PCAT. If you, unlike me, are willing to forgive the PCAT for its poor Chrono and date implementations, you are still faced with the question of whether the PCAT's bracelet is going to be a good fit for you, as the bracelet has a sizing granularity of 5 millimeters. My Citizen Courageous on the right, which has been discontinued, uses half links instead of microadjusts like the PCAT, and also has a sizing granularity of 5 millimeters. But with the Courageous, I at least get something out of my forfeiture of more precise sizing. I reap the benefit of a low-profile clasp that seamlessly fits into the bracelet with no discernible edge. The clasp is actually a part of the bracelet rather than a separate part. Unlike the Courageous, the PCAT's clasp is just another cheap generic part that sticks out over the bracelet in order to chafe others. Please subscribe, please like.